It all started when I decided to give my front garden a makeover. Nothing major, just a more desert-like touch, which I've always liked. I filled it with cacti of various sizes, beautiful succulents, some ornamental white stones, and that was it. My little oasis of peace. Of course, tranquility is an offensive concept to some people. On the third day after the new garden, she appeared. She came out of nowhere, like a condominium ghost, holding a clipboard as if it were the scepter of some decadent kingdom. She knocked on my gate with an authority that not even a military policeman in a blitz has. "These cacti," she began, her voice high and full of indignation, "are dangerous. Children could fall into them. It's a threat to the safety of the community." I swear that for a second, I thought it was a prank. I kept waiting for someone to come out of the bushes with a camera in hand. But no, she was serious. The problem was my cacti, plants, still plants, plants that don't move. They don't jump on anyone's neck. But in this lady's fertile mind, they were almost camouflaged war traps. She demanded that I remove them all of them. She claimed that the visual aesthetics of the street were being compromised and that thorns represented a lethal threat. And then the clowning began. She threatened to fine me, something she technically couldn't do herself. But you know that kind of person who treats the condominium bylaws as if they were the UN Constitution? She started hounding me with handwritten notices, I swear, and little notes stuck in my mailbox saying things like, "Thorns kill," and "You will be held responsible." I ignored it. Of course I ignored it, because it's not possible that someone thinks a cactus is comparable to, I don't know, a landmine. But ignoring this woman was the equivalent of pouring gasoline on an inflated ego. She started going around my garden, taking photos, measuring the distance of the cacti from the sidewalk with a tape measure, tar ENA, guys, and I even caught her once bending down to see if there were any thorns crossing the property line. The woman had become a botanical detective, until one day, at the height of her delirium, she outdid herself. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I was having coffee, looking out of the window at the garden, when I saw a scene that made me spit my coffee on my shirt. The crazy woman had broken into my yard. Yes, she opened the gate, which was unlocked because I was at home, and came in. She didn't ask. She didn't warn me. She didn't ring the bell. She simply broke in, as if she were a NASA inspector on a special mission. The reason? To inspect closely. According to her, the community needed more concrete evidence of the threat. That's exactly what she said afterwards. But in practice, what happened was that she tripped over an ornamental stone, fell straight into a row of cacti, and came out all bruised and screaming as if she was being attacked by a swarm of killer wasps. People. She looked like an inverted porcupine, full of little thorns on her arms and legs, crying, screaming, and threatening to call the police. And she did. With trembling fingers, she called 911 as if I had set her up in an action movie. "I'm seriously injured. He set traps in the backyard," she said. The attendant must have thought it was a prank, too. And look, I couldn't even get nervous, because seeing her all scratched up, flailing around in the middle of my garden, pointing at a 30-centimeter cactus as if it were a wild bear, that was comical, tragic, surreal, all of it. But what she didn't realize was that the whole house is monitored by cameras, and everything was recorded. From the moment she pushed open my gate to the glorious moment when she smashed into the ground, cursing plants as if they were people. The police arrived in a matter of minutes. She had, of course, already made a point of throwing herself on the floor of my garden, on purpose, as if she were in a dramatic episode of a medical series. The woman was lying on the grass, covered in thorns as if she had just come out of a fight against a giant porcupine. She was screaming in pain, but it wasn't real pain. It was theatrical pain, the kind that comes with exaggerated moans, gasping for breath, and a pleading look, just like a scene from a soap opera. Two policemen got out of the car, a little confused. I can just imagine their radio a few moments before. We have a woman claiming a plant attack in the neighborhood. No one is prepared for this kind of occurrence. They stepped into my yard slowly, looking around as if they were expecting an ambush by killer ferns. I went up to them with my cell phone in hand, calm, polite, but ready for anything. I showed them the cameras, the exact moment when she broke into the property, overbalanced and fell. No push, no trap, no indication that I had even approached her. Just a control-obsessed woman who thought she had the right to invade my space because of cacti. While the police watched the video, she continued to put on a show. She said that she had been attacked, that it was an attempted murder, that plants like that were not decent for a family neighborhood. One of the policemen even asked, "You mean he tried to kill you with a cactus?" And the most surreal thing was that she replied, "Yes, it's a gun garden." I held back my laughter. I really did. Because it's not every day that you hear someone refer to their garden as a war zone. But what was hilarious for me started to become embarrassing for the police. They quickly realized that they were facing a ridiculous scene. So ridiculous that they had to move away to laugh discreetly. Yes, they laughed. And I heard one of them whisper, "That's a new one," even for me. After watching the video a couple of times, they changed their stance. They dropped their investigative tone and started talking to her like someone who talks to a tantruming child who has thrown himself on the supermarket floor. One of the policemen asked her if she knew that trespassing on private property without permission was a crime. She responded by saying that, as a member of the neighborhood association, she had jurisdiction over the area. Jurisdiction. I didn't know whether to laugh or call a lawyer on the spot. The response was a long look from the policeman, followed by a sigh and a, "Ma'am, the neighborhood association is not the police." And that's when the game turned completely around. The policeman asked for her documents, wrote everything down, and meanwhile the other policeman was already asking for backup to file the police report. The woman began to realize that things were getting out of hand and tried to stand up with dignity, but she was all hunched over. It was like watching a pillow trying to walk. The cactus thorns were stuck to her clothes, arms, and legs, and every movement caused more pain. She tried to get out of there by playing the victim as if she had just survived an attempted floral murder. But authority was no longer on her side. The police explained that trespassing without permission was enough reason to arrest her. What's more, she was injured because she herself had trespassed, tripped, and fallen in a perfectly legal garden on property that wasn't hers, not to mention the false allegations made to 911. The icing on the cake was when they asked if I wanted to press charges. I just looked at her and said, "Absolutely." The look on her face was a mixture of fury and disbelief, as if she couldn't conceive of anyone having the audacity to defend themselves against her. And then, as required, she was taken aside, handcuffed carefully, more because of the thorns, I believe, and put in the car. The whole neighborhood was already watching from behind the curtains. There were even people recording it. Do you know that pleasant silence of justice being done? I felt it. For the first time since this woman crossed my path, I had peace. My cacti were still there, firm, thorny, and wonderful, as every garden should be, and the queen of paranoia walked away, all stubbled and sweaty, and probably regretting having underestimated a plant and overestimated her own importance. To think that the story would end there, with her walking away all spiked and handcuffed, would be the equivalent of thinking that a cockroach dies with a slipper. It doesn't. It just disappears for a few days and flies back in your face. And that's exactly what happened. 2 days later, with my garden in top shape, cacti lined up, shining in the sun and completely innocent, I receive a visit from a brown envelope left on my doorstep. No sender, of course. I opened it out of curiosity, and there it was, a formal letter from the Residents Association with an invitation to attend an extraordinary meeting on risks to physical integrity promoted by unauthorized garden decorations. I couldn't even get angry right away, because the idea of a committee made up of lifeless neighbors discussing whether thorny plants are biological weapons was so absurd that I just laughed it off. But then it hit me. She was behind it. Yes, even though she was arrested for trespassing, the woman managed to manipulate the HOA, the famous association of neighborhood bosses, into turning my cactus collection into a community safety case. Think of a level of obsession that goes beyond logic. She literally became a martyr in the fight against cacti, probably whining in the ear of the other bored old men on the association's board, with her melodramatic speech about how she was attacked by aggressive flora on home territory. And the most ridiculous thing, it worked. The HOA called an official meeting, with minutes and everything. I went out of obligation, of course, and what I found there was worthy of a comedy sketch. A room full of neighbors who seemed to be more concerned with finding out if they could install ornamental railings on their balcony than discussing actual gardening. But there they were, all attentive to the central microphone, where one of the directors began the show. "We are meeting today to deal with a serious situation involving the use of hostile plants." Hostile plants. I had to snort loudly to keep from laughing, and then came the masterstroke. Someone read a medical report attached to the spiked lady's file. Yes, she had the audacity to attach a medical report detailing the emotional and physical trauma caused by the thorns. It said that she had developed anxiety, fear of open spaces, and a mild case of paranoia when passing through areas with dense vegetation, as if she had returned from war. The only thing she failed to mention was that she woke up shouting "cacti" in the middle of the night. When they asked me to speak, I went straight to the point. I said that my garden followed all the rules of the statute. It was on my property, and that any adult with more than 2 neurons would know that entering someone's yard without permission is wrong, regardless of whether it has cacti, plastic flamingos, or a minefield. I argued that the woman didn't fall into a camouflaged hole. She tripped over a decorative stone because she was where she shouldn't have been. It was as simple as that. Some of the neighbors nodded discreetly. Others muttered, with the look of someone who understood but preferred to continue in the theater. But the most ridiculous thing happened at the end of the meeting. A vote was suggested to regulate the maximum height and type of plants allowed in front gardens. And, of course, this included a list of species with offensive potential, which included cacti, rose bushes, agaves, and, amazingly, even lavender, which, according to one of the residents, can attract dangerous bees. I left feeling like I had fallen into a parallel universe where everyone was freaking out about things that nature had invented. The woman managed to turn her own failure and the fall in my garden into an ideological campaign. And even with the video of her breaking in and stabbing herself, the narrative became something almost biblical. The heroine of the association attacked by killer plants. All that was missing was the priest at the meeting to bless the gardens. In the days that followed, she reappeared. She was free, probably because she didn't have a criminal record. And of course, with an even more inflated pose. She walked down the street with a scarf around her neck, as if she had escaped the guillotine, and looked at her neighbors hoping that someone would applaud her for her sacrifice in the name of the floral order. And what's worse, some did applaud. Some believed the narrative. One of them stopped me on the sidewalk and said, "I understand that you like cacti, but have you ever thought about planting something more friendly?" I almost replied, "Friendly? Like what? A poodle?" But I stopped myself. I just smiled and kept walking, because I already knew what was coming. That woman wasn't going to rest until my garden was a neutral field, without a single leaf outside the standard she accepted. But what she didn't know was that, while she was waging war on cacti, I was preparing my counterattack, not with plants, but with documents, laws, and a formal complaint about abuse of authority, neighborhood harassment, and manipulation of the HOA for personal ends. If there's one thing I've learned from all this shenanigans, it's that the HOA people have a unique talent for pretending to care about justice, when in reality they're just protecting the interests of those who speak the loudest, or shout the loudest in her case. But what she didn't expect was that I also knew how to shout, only in the right place, in the city's legal department. Because if this woman wanted to play court, I was going to bring the gavel. I filed a formal complaint against her for neighborhood harassment, attempted coercion via the neighborhood association, abuse of power within the board, and, of course, the icing on the cake, trespassing. I attached everything, from the security camera videos showing her jumping the gate and getting into the cacti like a lunatic, to the threatening notes about hostile plants. I made a point of transcribing even the absurdities, like the note in which she wrote, "Thorns kill." I still wonder if she thought she was dealing with genetically modified carnivorous plants. But it didn't stop there. I made a point of hiring a lawyer, and not just anyone. I got a guy who looked like he'd taken down half a dozen scumbag businessmen over breakfast. A dry, straightforward guy who read the documents with that expression of boredom and disgust, as if he already knew he was going to win. And he loved the case. He laughed out loud when he read the minutes of the meeting that called cacti plants of offensive potential. He said, "My God, this is going to make a great story at happy hour." Meanwhile, the woman began to realize that things were getting out of hand. He began to walk down the street less, and when he did, he no longer had that air of superiority. The neighborhood's martyr mask began to crack, and even the neighbors who had previously pretended to believe in the drama began to look away, because deep down, everyone knew she had crossed the line. And now she was reaping what she had sown. And it wasn't lavender, it was confusion. The process moved quickly, perhaps because the judge read the documents and immediately understood how absurd it all was. At the hearing, she appeared with a recently graduated lawyer, one of those who seemed to have been hired with an Amazon gift certificate, the kind who comes in talking too loudly, thinking he's going to impress, but only irritates. And what about her? She tried to play the victim. She wore a neck brace that was clearly just for effect. She claimed that she had lasting psychological damage, and that since the accident, she could no longer leave the house without feeling terrified of cacti. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked, "Are you telling me that you have post-traumatic stress because you fell in a garden?" And she said yes, that it wasn't just a question of thorns, it was aesthetic violence. I almost choked. Aesthetic violence. Her words sounded like something out of an insanity dictionary. It was then that my lawyer, in that monotone voice of someone who has seen it all, simply asked for the video to be shown. He didn't say anything. He just pressed play, and there she was, in full HD, jumping over the gate, fiddling with the plants, tripping over a stone and throwing herself into the cacti as if she were throwing herself into a sea of needles. The room fell silent, and the judge shook his head with the typical expression of someone who is tired of people making fools of themselves in a formal setting. The decision was simple. She was obliged to pay compensation for moral and material damages because, yes, she broke part of the fence when she fell, as well as tarnishing my image before the HOA with the false accusations. She lost her right to sit on any residents' association board in the city for 5 years and received a court warning prohibiting her from going near my home without permission. When she left the courtroom, her neck brace was already a little loose. It looked like the performance had worn her out. And you know what? I didn't even take pleasure in her defeat. I felt relief. Relief at knowing that for the first time in a long time, I was going to be able to look after my garden in peace, without being treated like a botanical terrorist because of half a dozen thorny plants. The irony is that after that, cacti became a local attraction. Some neighbors started planting them too. A lady from the back street asked me where I bought it, because it's low maintenance and repels the neighbor's cat. And that's when I realized that perhaps, without meaning to, I had started a silent revolution in the neighborhood, a revolution of thorns. And the woman who tried to eradicate my garden ended up being the joke herself. She disappeared for a while. Some say she moved away. Others swear she was seen in a gardening store trying to return a pot because the plant looked at her funny. I sincerely hope she's learned her lesson. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave your like and comment below.